afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If I can call you to attention, we're going to resume our program. Our next session on the docket today deals with the challenges faced in reporting and investigating missing persons, a very real and sobering issue, not just in Central Florida and the state of Florida, but throughout the nation. We have two wonderful and worthy speakers this afternoon that are going to approach this topic. I want to introduce both of them first, and then to lead off, I'm going to call up Hillary Sessions. Our two speakers today are Ms. Hillary Sessions and Detective Kevin Allen. Detective Kevin Allen is a cold case homicide detective with the Alachua County Sheriff's Office in Gainesville, Florida. Kevin has been in law enforcement for over 30 years and is retired from the City of Fort Lauderdale Police Department. His entire career has been as an investigator, and he has been assigned to the Homicide Division, robbery, sexual battery, child abuse, and he formed the RICO squad at the Fort Lauderdale PD. Detective Allen holds a bachelor's degree from St. Thomas University in Miami and has received extensive training in interview and interrogation, cold case investigation, and DNA analysis. To lead us off this afternoon, it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Hillary Sessions. Ms. Sessions was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and lived in Baghdad, Iraq for a year and Switzerland for 2. She visited 44 countries before the age of 16. She lives in Valrico, Florida, where she was Executive Director of Child Protection Education of America for 5 years, from 2004 through 2009, and a volunteer for missing children nationally for 25 years. Her organization was the second largest missing children's organization after the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in the U.S., based on the number of active missing children's cases. Hillary's only child, Tiffany Sessions, went out for a jog on February 9th, 1989, from her condo at the University of Florida in Gainesville, and still hasn't been located. Hillary's passion is to educate every parent so that they aren't as unprepared as she was, by making sure each child is fingerprinted, DNA collected, lots of facial and full body photographs or videos of the child, and the parents have a copy of their medical, dental, and DNA and blood records. Hillary also advocates that parents have safety information and abduction prevention information available to them. She also advocates that every child from ages 3 through 12 have the RAD Kids Child Empowerment Training, which is life skills course. Hillary is also author of the true crime novel entitled Where's My Tiffany?, which is a behind-the-scenes look at a major crime which is still occurring as we speak. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Hillary Sessions.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to put up a picture, which was the first one that we put out for Tiffany. This was one of the last known pictures that we had of her. She went out for a power walk on February 9th of 1989, and to date, and this is in 2014, she still hasn't been found. Now, I didn't know this was ever going to happen to me. I never expected it. It always happens to young children, but really it doesn't. Tiffany was 20 at the time of her disappearance, and the biggest problem was that law enforcement didn't want to take a look for her because she was over the age of 18. She was 20. So we had to call on the community to help us actually fund and support a search for her, since law enforcement didn't want to do it at the time. And the first week that she was missing, the family actually was out doing the search. And the second week, we called on the military and the local community, and we had about 1,500 people that went out and walked shoulder to shoulder through the areas that law enforcement felt that she might have been taken. The biggest problem that I had was that nobody really wanted to help. So I had to turn to looking for how can we get the word out. And shortly after Tiffy disappeared, there was an agency actually in the Tampa area called Missing Children Help Center. And without them, I don't think I could have done what I have done over the last 25 years. They had been in existence because they started with a Dee Schofield Awareness Program in Ocala, where Dee Dee Schofield was abducted in 1974, and she still hasn't been found to date. But because of their working in terms of the missing children across the nation, we were able to publicize Tiffany's picture. Now, keep in mind, in 1989, there was no internet. So we had to devise other ways of getting her picture out. We had posters that we put on the backs of trucks. So on the left rear door of a tractor trailer, you had a picture of a missing child. If you put it on the side of the truck, people were passing too quickly, so they didn't get a chance to see the picture. But if you were behind the truck, you could see the picture of the missing child. And Tiffany was on those. We did bumper stickers because as I said, we didn't have the internet. We sent out. This is the beginning of fax machines, and we would fax out Tiffy's poster. My husband and I were working at our fresh seafood company in South St. Pete, and we had customers all over the world. We had them in the Sultanate of Oman, in Thailand, in Anchorage, Alaska, in Japan, and we sent Tiffy's pictures out to all of those areas inside our fish boxes. Now, don't worry. We wrapped them up in plastic bags and we sealed them and put them in the fish boxes. One of our customers was Marks and Spencer's over in London. And London, their main store at the Marble Arches actually had, they would move 40,000 pounds of food per hour through that store. So that's a tractor trailer coming in the back door and going out the front door every single hour for every hour that they were open. Well, they had 2,500 stores between the UK and the continent, and we asked them if they would put Tiffy's picture up, and they did. They put it up in every one of their stores once we sent them the copy. Another one of our friends was one of my neighbors, and actually there were two of them. They were identical twin brothers, and they were the original Thunderbirds in the Air Force, and they were both retired generals, and one of the sons and a nephew of the other brother actually was in the military, and he was going off to Saudi Arabia, and he stopped in every one of the military bases as he was going to Saudi and left pictures of Tiffy for us. We had truck drivers that were friends of one of my other neighbors, and they delivered the pictures on their truck stops as they were going north to Boston, west to California, north to Michigan with produce and other different products. So we looked at ways before the internet of distributing pictures of the missing child. My ex-husband actually offered a reward for Tiffy's safe return, and it started out at $75,000 and went up to $250,000. But that's a double-edged sword, because in 30 days after he posted the reward, somebody found out where I lived, and over the course of the next year, I had 30 attempted break-ins at my house. They tried to get in every window, every door in the house. They tried to get into the garage door, the people door in the garage, the front door, the back door, the sliding glass door, multiple times. And thank goodness, and this is not a plug for ADT because it was Sonatrol at the time, but I didn't have anybody get into my house. They made the attempts, but they didn't get in, which is a good thing, because when you're in a situation like I was in, the trauma of having a missing child actually gets compounded when other things like that happen. And in my book, Where's My Tiffany, I chronicled all of the things that I did over the years for missing children and with other families of missing children. And I know you have a local case, Jennifer Kessie's case, and Drew and Joyce Kessie have become some of my best friends, along with Mark Lunsford, Jessica Lunsford's dad, and Dina Thompson from up in Orange City, and Ed Smart, Elizabeth Smart's dad. We're in a group of families that when you see each other, you know that it's your brother, your sister. We just know how the other one's feeling without even having to communicate that. So one of the biggest issues that I dealt with after Tiffy disappeared, because she was my best friend. She still is my best friend. Tiffy was born on October 29th, 1968, and Patrick, Tiffany's father, and I were separated the 1st of January of the following year, 1969. And he did not see his little girl except for 40 hours, which is the normal work week, for 18 years. He did not care to participate in her life. He did not care to support her. And I raised this child by myself. And right after the investigation started, he went to the law enforcement and said, "Don't give her any information." And I don't know whether that was his guilt coming out for not being there for his child, or he felt that he was the only one that could handle the investigation. And for 24 years, I suffered trying to do an investigation myself, not as a pro. I am not a professional law enforcement officer, but doing the things that I thought would help to bring my little girl back. And I looked at anything that could help me, and I mean anything. Shortly after she disappeared, in actually the end of March, I was at a seafood event up in Boston, and I met this another person in the seafood industry, and she said, "Have you read a book called We Don't Die?" And I said, "No." So she said, "You really need to read that," because I was in the depths of depression. You know, my little girl was gone, and I didn't want to be away. I felt like I was abandoning her and the case when I went to Boston, but my husband insisted that I go up there with him. So I immediately went out and bought the book, and I couldn't put it down. And I said, "Oh boy, I've got to talk to this guy." His name is George Anderson. So I called the editor of the book, and I said, "Is there any way that I can get a hold of George Anderson?" And she said, "Well, let me see what I can do to help you." So about 2 days later, I got a call from an investigator, and he said, "I understand that you want to see George." And I said, "Yeah." So he said, "Well, let me see what I can do." So I told him a little bit about the case, and he said, "Well, let's see what we can do." So he called me back the next day because he had to go testify in a court case. And he said, "George will see you, but he can't see you next week because it's Holy Week." And he said, "But how about the Thursday after Holy Week, after Easter?" And I said, "That's fine." So I went up to see him, and I spent 3 hours with George. And George said, after talking to me, and he did all the talking, and I just said yes or no, answered the question, and he said, "Tiffany is dead." And it was like somebody hit me in the stomach with a big baseball bat. And he said something's happened to her neck or the back of her head. And I said, oh my gosh. Well, after being with him for 3 hours, I had to catch a plane back down to Tampa. And there was a snowstorm starting, and we were a little bit delayed, and because we were delayed in New York, I was delayed getting into Atlanta, and so I didn't make my connection in Atlanta to get back to Tampa, and I was in a hotel room all by myself with the knowledge that George had said my daughter was dead. Well, this is 3 months into the investigation, and I wasn't ready to give up. So when I got back to Tampa, I talked to my parents who lived down in Punta Gorda, and I told them what had happened. And so my mother says, okay, that's it. We're going to have a memorial service, and you're going to move on with your life. And I went, what? And I said I wasn't going to go. I'm not giving up on finding Tiffany. Tiffany is out there and she's alive, and I'm going to find her. My mother insisted that we do the memorial service, so she organized the whole thing, and my husband at the time, Doug, said, well, let's go down there. We'll put in an appearance. So I didn't say anything during the entire event. I did not speak to any of my siblings. I have 2 sisters and a brother. And the day after that event, my entire family disappeared. They didn't help me. They never came to a search. They never came to assist me, to support me emotionally, physically. My entire family deserted me. In a missing child's case, that's not uncommon. It's not uncommon to have divorces. In fact, my husband, Doug, had been with me for 18 years, and during that 18 years, it was 8 years of Tiffy's investigation. After 8 years, he said, you either have to give up Tiffy's case or you have to give up me. And I said, see you later. I refused to let anybody come between my daughter and me. And I've lost a lot of friends because of that, but I have always kept one thing in mind, and that is I brought this child into this earth, and I will find out what happened to her. So every day is a new day. When you have a case like this, it's a roller coaster ride. Some days you're super high because there's a possibility of a piece of evidence that might solve the case. And when the information comes back and it's not, then you end up going into a deep depression. A lot of families turn to legal drugs that are prescribed because they can't sleep, illegal drugs because what they get prescribed is not enough, alcohol, whether it's wine or hard liquor. Some people have affairs with other women or other men because they can't seem to get satisfaction any other way. Some people turn to food. I turn to food because it's not illegal. But you deal with your loss in many different ways. And one of my problems with dealing with this loss was, and this was a very depressing day, I thought to myself, well, I think I'm just going to take the car out and run myself into a bridge abutment. And then I looked at myself in the face and I said, you can't do that, because who's going to help to find her? If you decide that you're going to join her, if she is dead, then who's going to help to promote safety for other families? Who's going to help other families with their loss? So I tabled that idea, said, no, that's not a good idea. Then I looked at, how can I help other families? And I had never thought about changing the laws to help other families. And all this time, I was a victim. And I never had a victim's advocate that worked with me for 24 years. So I dealt with this all by myself. My mother wanted to lock me up, and she said, you're a little crazy. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm just trying to find my child. And so I looked at what can I do to help other families of missing children. So from the very beginning, I started doing a lot of media, a lot of news stories. I flew to New York, I can't tell you how many times, for Maury Povich and Sally Jesse Raphael, and Toronto, Canada for their Shirley show. And then I had Inside Edition. I mean, they came down like 20 times. A Current Affair came down half a dozen times. And everybody wanted to film in a different place in the house. So, you know, my house was just a movie studio. But that's what you have to do. And I saw the benefits of all the media that I've done over the last 25 years. Actually, I saw it about 3 years ago. I was going to work one day and I was a little bit late. And for years and years and years and years, I preached, if your child is going to school and they ride the bus or they walk to school, that is the #1 place where children are abducted more than anything else. And I said, you need to be able to get your child to school one way or the other, whether you walk them and then walk home, or you go to the bus stop and wait with them, or you come back. Well, I was going to work and I was a little late. It was the afternoon return bus trips from school. And I got stuck behind a school bus, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is going to be a long trip, and I'm going to be late. The first stop, there was a mom, and the stop was right in front of the house, and I could see the mom looking out the window. The second stop had like 5 different cars, 3 or 4 different people, all standing at the end of a cul-de-sac. And the bus stopped, and all these kids got out, and their moms and their uncles and their aunts and their grandmothers were all there to greet them and walk them back to their houses. And I thought to myself, you know, people are listening to what I had to say. The second most important place is a public restroom. And this is where children are abducted more than any place else. And it was brought home to me with a friend of mine up in Atlanta. He was in a mall in Atlanta, and he and his wife were in the food court, and their daughter, who was able to, she was like 7 years old, said, Daddy, Daddy, I've got to go to the bathroom. And he said to his wife, I'll take her. So, of course, he couldn't go in the ladies' room, so he waited outside. And he stood there leaning up against the the wall and doing all kinds of contortions, waiting for his daughter to come out, and she didn't come out. Finally, an older woman walked up, and he said, "Can I get your help?" And she said, "Sure, what do you want?" And he said, "Well, my daughter went into the ladies' room, and she hasn't come out yet. Can you check and see if she's okay?" And she said, "Sure." So she walked in, and as soon as she walked in, two teenage girls walked out. One was like 13 and one was like 15. And they both had raincoats on. And he said, "That's kind of weird. Why are they wearing raincoats?" And he looked at the skylight in the mall, and he said, "The sun's out. Why are they wearing raincoats?" Well, then he noticed that there was a big bulge on the back of one of the raincoats. And in the flap of the back of the raincoat, he saw sneakers, and he recognized his daughter's sneakers. So he ran after those two. He tackled the one that had the sneakers, and it was his daughter. And guess what? One girl was 13, one was 15, and they had been charged with bringing a human to an event that night, and they were going to sacrifice her and cut out her heart. And he said, "You know what? I never would have found out what happened to my daughter if I hadn't been there at the ladies' room, because they would have walked off and nobody would have been the wiser." And the last place is a public park. And I went and testified in front of the county commission in Hillsborough County. And I said, you know, the third most common place for predators to go is a public park. And as soon as the county commissioners heard that, they said, "Oh my gosh, where's Parks and Rec? We need them right now." So they had a meeting with Parks and Rec. And what did they do? They said, "We're going to fix this." So now in Hillsborough County, in every park, once a month, they update for 1 mile around each one of the parks. They update and put the posters of the predators and the offenders that live within that 1 mile area. Now, once they started it took them about 2 days to get everything up. How long do you think it took them to find 2 predators? 1 hour. Because these predators were used to going to the park and coming back. Now, I've told you my story, but over 24 years, I had numerous investigators that were charged with the case, but I never spoke to them because they never would call me back. And about the 3rd of January of 2013, I had been informed, like the week before, right over Christmas, that there was going to be a new investigator coming on the case, and he was going to be charged with all the cold cases. There were 27 of them in Alachua County. So I waited the 2nd of January, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to give him a call on the 3rd. So I called Alachua County. I didn't even know his name. I called the Alachua County main number, and I identified who I was. "Oh, Mrs. Sessions, what can we do for you?" I said, "I understand you have a new investigator." And they said, "Oh, yeah, his name is Kevin Allen." I said, "Oh, great. Can I talk to him, please?" So this wonderful voice picked up the phone and said, "Mrs. Sessions, I was just thinking about calling you." And this is what happened for the last year and a half. When he thinks about calling me, I'm already calling him, or vice versa. He finishes my sentences, I finish his sentences. It's like I have a kindred spirit. We are on the same wavelength. And because of what he has done, I want you to meet the best investigator in the whole world, Kevin Allen.
First of all, that's not true. My name's Kevin Allen, and I'm a detective with the Alachua County Sheriff's Office. I'm a cold case detective. I retired from the City of Fort Lauderdale Police Department in 2005, I decided I wanted to get out of South Florida. There was too much crime. So I talked my wife into moving to Gainesville, and she got a job at the University of Florida to get away from the crime. Well, man, was I wrong. 1990, 5 University of Florida students were murdered by Danny Rawlings. And a year prior to that, Hillary's daughter, Tiffany, was abducted. And I've been honored to be involved in that case. That's the case I'd like to talk to you about today. Tiffany was a 20-year-old college student at the University of Florida. She was a junior. Every night she'd go for a little power walk, same route every day from her southwest Gainesville apartment. On February the 9th, 1989, Tiffany Sessions went for that walk and she disappeared off the face of the earth. The case was thoroughly investigated for 24 years before I got on board. There were dozens of detectives assigned to the case. They did a really good job. And in 1989, cops didn't do much with missing persons people. We usually said, call me in a couple days. If you're in a university town, it was even more frequent. I was hired in January 2013 by our sheriff, who has a passion for cold case. She is involved in almost every one of my cases. She calls me, emails me all the time just to talk about cases. She's a great sheriff. Okay. Well, I might as well get on without my slides. One of the first things I did when I got involved in the investigation is I went through all of the documents that had been recovered over the years. There were 7 boxes, which I have a picture of here. And there were just thousands of documents. A lot of people have done a lot of work on Tiffany's case. And the next thing I did is I read all the case files. It was about 6 full big black notebooks and several accordion files also. I read everything that had been done previously on Hillary's daughter's case. And we never really had a good suspect. We had no body, we had no evidence, we had no witnesses, and therefore the case had never been resolved. How are we doing, Joe? Okay, thank you. I'm probably squeezing it too hard. This is the first time I've done this presentation, so I apologize. Those were the boxes. They'd been stored in a cold case storage room for several years before I got involved. Not much had been done in the last couple of years. You know, when a missing person case goes cold, there's really not much you could do. Those were all of our cold cases stored in a bunch of file cabinets, and those were all the written files. But then we got a break in 2012. The previous cold case detective, Heather Phillips, had submitted for a cold case grant. We had $300,000 from the Department of Justice. And that allowed us to send away to private labs for DNA testing. If you go through the normal chain of commands with DNA testing through the normal government agency, sometimes you can wait weeks or months. And when your daughter's missing, you don't want to hear that. And when your family member's been murdered, you don't want to hear that. So Heather Phillips was a detective, and what she did is she submitted all suspect standards that we had on a similar case in 1992. 1992 was 3 years after Tiffany disappeared, and we got a match. This case was very similar to Tiffany Sessions. The victim, Beth Foster, was a 20-year-old college student. She was abducted less than a mile from where Tiffany went on her regular walk every day. She was raped, she was beaten to death, and she was left in a shallow grave in a wooded area. So here's an aerial view. I don't know if this pointer thing works, but Tiffany lived at the Casablanca townhouses, and you could see her little walk that she took every day. We're pretty sure she was abducted, where I highlight in red over there, at an apartment complex that was under construction back then. Beth Foster's body was found about a mile away 3 years later, and her vehicle was left very close to where Tiffany lived. So Detective Phillips did what any good detective would do. Got right in the car, went down to talk to this guy. He's a bad guy. He's doing life in prison for multiple murders of 20-year-old college students. When Heather talked to Department of Corrections, she was told he's a crotchety old man. He'd pretty much lost his mind. He'd done dozens of years in prison. And after she was done interviewing him, he didn't cooperate. He didn't want to say anything. He basically said we didn't know what we were talking about, and she left. We sent down another team of investigators after that, but he didn't talk then either. And then I got on board. My sheriff is passionate about cold cases. I was only working there a week. She called me into her office and she said, Tiffany's case is a high priority, my highest priority. I want this solved during my tenure. And she was adamant about it. She said, time is of the essence. We've got a great suspect. We have another 20-year-old college student raped, beaten to death, left in a shallow grave a mile from Tiffany's route. Kevin, get down and talk to him. Yes, Sheriff. When I got down there, he was terminal. He was heavily sedated. He was on life support, and the ICU nurse says he's not likely to recover. I left that picture with the ICU nurse and said, if this guy ever wakes up, show him this picture. Maybe we'll get a dying declaration. He died 2 weeks later. If there's any justice, he died of lung cancer. He wasn't comfortable when I talked to him. I tried to talk the nurses into bringing down the sedation, but I couldn't talk him into it. He died of sepsis and multi-organ failure. He basically had lung cancer. Again, my sheriff gets involved. At the top, she's a sheriff. She's got a lot of other stuff going on. I email her. She gets back with me 30 seconds later. 30 seconds. And she says, go down and get his property. He's been in prison all that time. Maybe he wrote something down. Maybe there's something in his property. Great instincts. One of the first, and I do it, of course. I'm a detective. She's the boss. I open up this whole box of writings, and he's nuts. He's written all these crazy things down repeatedly. But there's a little address book. Inside this address book is 2989. If any date is permanently etched in my memory, it's February the 9th, 1989. That's the day Tiffany was abducted. The number 2, I'd done some research on this guy at this point. Linda Fida was his first victim. Tiffany Sessions, chronologically, would have been his second victim. I call the FBI. I know they have an open kidnapping case. I'm going to need some resources. We have a possible link to Tiffany Sessions' abduction. They said he wrote it. And they reopened the case. I've got a lot of resources now. I go back to the address book. He documents every one of his victims. Linda Fida. Linda also was a 20-year-old college student, beautiful, kind young lady. Paul Rolls lived right across the hall from her at an apartment complex in Miami. He was a stalker. He got to know her schedule. Linda's husband went to work, worked nights. Paul Rolls knew exactly when he was going to work. When Linda went to do her laundry in the apartment complex, she'd closed the deadbolt so that she could get back in. Paul Rolls knew exactly what he was doing and when he did it. This is from his confession in 1972 for his first murder. He broke into Linda's apartment to have sex with her. He armed himself with a knife. He approached her from behind with a hand over her mouth and a knife to her throat. That's his MO. The victim screamed and began to struggle. He choked her to death. And he tried to have sex with her post-mortem, stabbed her in the breast because he really doesn't like women, post-mortem. And just to be sure, he dragged her into her own bathtub and held her underwater for 5 minutes. He's not a nice guy. Then he wiped all of his fingernails from the scene. Miami-Dade PD case. He hired a lawyer. The lawyer immediately pursued the insanity defense. And no big surprise here, his biggest disturbances were in the sexual realm. He was under constant pressure when he saw women, and he had urges that were so strong he basically could not control them. That's what he told his first psychiatrist. They sent him to South Florida State Mental Hospital. He was only evaluated one more time professionally by any psychiatrist or psychologist. And this was in 1994 after his last victim. He started having these fantasies when he was 11 or 12 years old. It's all about the same thing, domination and rape of women. And eventually, towards the end of his life, before he was incarcerated permanently, They just became all-consuming for him. That's all he thought about. And it was this psychiatrist's opinion that defendant has mixed paraphilia with sexual sadism, rape, and voyeurism. Well, the defense attorney figures he's going to get the electric chair, so he pleads him up. He pleads him guilty. He wants to get life in prison without the possibility of parole. The state attorney on the case, James Woodard, said, the offense committed was one of the most brutal murders he'd ever seen, and that's in Miami. He should never be considered for parole. Mr. Woodard actually sat in and monitored the confession when he sat down. He said he never heard such a cold-blooded confession in his life. The judge on the case, Judge Rivkin, said that the defendant should stay in prison for the rest of his life. He should never see the light of day. He pled guilty, life in prison without the possibility of parole. I was a homicide detective in Fort Lauderdale in the same time frame. The average sentence for life in prison was 10 to 15 years in the 80s, after the Mariel boat lift. So he's sentenced to life in prison, yet he's released in 1985. He moves to Gainesville in 1988. 6 months later, Tiffany disappears. Back to the address book. Laura was his last victim. Laura was a teenager. She lived in the same apartment complex as Paul Roll's second wife. Paul was visiting and he saw Laura in a bikini in the backyard and he got fixated. He was living in Jacksonville at the time. He drove down to her apartment. Oh, please note how he extrapolates age 20 in there. He drives from his apartment in Jacksonville to Clearwater 3 days in a row. He breaks in through a screen window. No one's home. He knows everyone's schedule. He scoped it out thoroughly. But on the third, he went down there to steal her underwear. He stole her underwear every day, then he brought it back to Jacksonville to masturbate. That's what he said in his confession. But on the third day, Laura had stayed home sick from school, so she was in her own bed. So he woke her up. He put a knife to her throat and he said, if you don't cooperate, I'm going to stick this 6 inches into your heart. She's like 14 years old. He brought his own duct tape. He duct taped her eyes shut, her hands behind her back. He brought a raincoat for her and dark glasses. He had a lot of plans for Laura. But when he got her back in his car in Clearwater, in his own car, he drove someplace. He drove to Gainesville, and he stopped at the Steak and Shake. This is from Laura's statement from 1994. He kept going through all these wooded areas. She knew he was going to kill her. So he went to the Steak and Shake, actually bought her a burger, then drove about a mile from there, pulled up into the woods, and he offered her lunch. He raped her there, put her back in the car, and brought it to his own apartment in Jacksonville. He had a lot of plans for Laura, and he told her that he was going to have her several times over many days. Laura was a very resilient kid. She knew she was going to die. She told Paul Rolls that if he made her something to eat and let her watch a little TV, maybe she could relax a little bit and then she could be more cooperative. Paul Rolls went into the kitchen to make her a TV dinner, and when the bell rang on the microwave, she ran out the door completely naked, ran into a neighbor, called 911. He was arrested very soon thereafter. That's the Steak and Shake. That's where Beth Foster lived, a little bit below that. At the very bottom is where he left Beth Foster's body, and on the far left is where Tiffany lived. So in his confession, because when he's confronted right after the crime by law enforcement, full confession, doesn't back down at all, absolutely compliant, yes sir, no sir, extremely cooperative with law enforcement. He was never questioned on Tiffany's case. Not until he had lost his mind and way too late. So in his confession, he said, with Laura, he pulled off the road, and it was a wooded area. It was kind of like an area where people would go and drop things that they wanted to drop or they didn't want found, like the body of Beth Foster. So this is Beth Foster's scene. It's right off the road. The little trail goes in the woods, a wooded area. There's a dumping ground there. This is where Beth's body was left. That's before the excavation. It's post-excavation. Never underestimate a mother's instincts. When Beth Foster disappeared, they didn't find her body for about 10 days in 1992. Hillary came to town, and it was a big deal. A college town, we have another missing college student. They had a little press conference. I don't know, you might want to turn up the volume
He
if
says
we have
none
access.
have been found, but they are not ruling out the possibility. Hillary Sessions,
Next
the mother
question.
of missing student
Somebody
Tiffany, came to ask questions of her own.
Calling here to see if there's any possibility that Tiffany might also be in that same location.
We have no evidence right now, Hillary, to connect this particular investigation with the disappearance of Tiffany. However, we're not ruling it out either.
So Hillary put something together in 1992 that we didn't do. Another 20-year-old college student's left buried here. Could there be another body there? I called NCMEC, if any of you aren't familiar with it, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. What a resource. Funding up the wazoo. They have plenty of money. They're all retired cops, all retired investigators. I told them what we had. We had a 20-year-old college student missing, another 20-year-old college student found about a mile apart. They said, did you use cadaver dogs in 1992? I asked the previous investigators. No, they hadn't. So we brought some canines in that could search for human remains. 5 different dogs came to town. They all alerted for other human remains within 25 feet of Beth Foster's body. In Fort Lauderdale, I never had to go looking for bodies, but in Gainesville, I do. So the conclusion of this canine unit, 5 canines, that there's other human remains there. So I talked to the medical examiner's office. I said, 1992, what'd you guys do? Did you look for other disturbed earth? Same medical examiner. He said, yeah, well, we looked, 25 feet away or so. We looked underneath the grave, but that's as far as they went. It's obviously within Paul Roll's comfort zone. He left a 20-year-old college student here. I go back to NCMEC, and I said, what would you do if you were me? I never had to go looking for bodies. That's not my area of expertise. It's their area of expertise. They flew in the 2 top HRD people, human remains detection, from different parts of the country. They paid for the best cadaver dogs in the country to come to town, put them up in a hotel for 2 or 3 days, and their dogs also alerted for other human remains. Canines alerted positive for human remains. NCMEC recommends excavation. So who do I call? I call my sheriff. I know she's got a passion for cold cases. I know she's going to back me. That's just the kind of person she is. I told her it's going to be expensive. It's going to take a lot of manpower. She has 3 words for me: get it done. So I put together an ops plan. I'd never done an excavation before, never had to dig for a body for weeks on end. So the first thing we did is we got some aerial photos. You'll see the little orange highlights. That's where the canines alerted for other human remains. Beth's body is in red. It's a pretty big area. It's equivalent of a couple of football fields. But I also want to search the escape route, the probable escape route of Paul Rolls. We got all these experts coming to town in the area of excavation and cadaver dogs. So Tiffany was abducted near the Polos, upper left. That power line easement is a very private area. If you've got a victim you're holding down in a car, you don't want headlights coming at you, you don't want someone sticking their head up and someone calling 911, that's really private. I'm pretty sure that's the route that he left. So we had 2 different searches to do. We're going to excavate and we're going to search the probable escape route. I decided to do this thing in plain clothes because Tiffany Sessions' case is a big case where I work. And I was told by my first supervisor when I first got to work there, he said, if you ever do a search for Tiffany Sessions, CNN will be there in 15 minutes. Don't let anybody know what you're doing. Nick Mick supervised the whole thing, paid for the whole thing. They have their 2 top human remains detection people. It's the 3rd time they're in our town helping. They are an incredible resource. Mike Valancourt happens to be the business partner of the father of Tiffany Sessions, Pat Sessions. He volunteered all the equipment. So now I don't even have any expenses in the whole thing. We're going to have cadaver dogs do the search of the probable escape route. And since most human bodies in surreptitious graves, they're buried 24 to 36 inches down, we got to go 4 feet. This was the team that we put together to do the excavation. Everybody had a task. We had to secure it 24/7. FBI had half a dozen agents there the whole time. FDLE helped. It was a total team effort, and it took the better part of 2 weeks. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about victim advocates. Back when I was a detective in South Florida, we didn't have victim advocates. I never met one until I came to work for the sheriff's office in Alachua County. And Teresa Kane walked up to me. We have a 3-person victim advocate unit, and she said, "I like to read cold cases for fun." I said, "Oh, you're going to be a good partner." She has done such wonderful work. Oh, there we go. I asked Teresa just to write something down about the things that she does. She's involved with all of my cold case victims. They think of things as an investigator I would never think of, like just calling out of the blue to say, "How are you doing?" On someone's birthday or anniversary of a homicide, she'll call, just to say, "I'm thinking about you." She'll send business cards. She's in touch with every single one of my remaining family members of cold cases. And these people write these glowing letters to the sheriff, and they call me and thank me for all the work I'm doing. It's all her. She's just a great people person. Another kind of unusual thing we did on this case, and this was at the urging of Pat Sessions, is that we cooperated with a national news show called 48 Hours on Saturday night at 10 o'clock. It's all true crime. Pat was thinking that if we don't find Tiffany, we can get national exposure for Tiffany's case. So we let them in every step of the way, for every part of the excavation, search, full access to the investigation too.
Now to a story you're seeing first on CBS This Morning. There's been a major development in one of Florida's most famous missing person cases. 20-year-old college student Tiffany Sessions disappeared back in 1989. 48 Hours correspondent Tracy Smith is here to break the news that sheriff investigators are sharing with her. Tracy, good morning.
Good morning, Gail. This Sunday will mark the 25th anniversary of the day Tiffany Sessions vanished. Her parents and detectives have spent all this time looking for any trace of her and finding nothing. For the past 5 years, 48 Hours has been working this story, and now detectives tell us they think they know who killed Tiffany Sessions.
This is what I think of when I think of her.
On February 9th, 1989, Tiffany Sessions, a junior at the University of Florida, went out for her daily power walk and disappeared. Tiffany's parents, Pat and Hillary, rushed to Gainesville to look for her.
We were all trying to get a handle on what possible explanation. Did she have a boyfriend nobody knew about? She didn't have her wallet, her driver's license, her car was there, and that was the scary part.
Hillary had just seen Tiffany at Christmas 1 month earlier.
She came up to me and she gave me a hug. And it was a hug that I'd never had before. It was a very, very long hug. And she gave me a big kiss and she said, "Mom, I love you."
She would have been wearing some kind of a sweatsuit.
Jim Eckert was one of the lead detectives in 1989.
This woman literally vanished off the face of the earth.
I need your help.
In desperation, Pat, a marketing executive, did what he knows how to do best. He organized press conferences, brought in famous faces like Football Hall of Famer Dan Marino.
Hello, I'm Jeb Bush.
And politician Jeb Bush. And he coordinated one of the biggest private searches in Florida history. Over 700 people showed up. They searched the swamps around Tiffany's walking route. They blanketed the state with flyers, put Tiffany's face on billboards, and answered the hotline.
I mean, this was really kind of unprecedented, the amount of attention that Tiffany Sessions got. And yet,
No leads, no physical evidence.
It was pretty obvious we were in a huge problem. If anything was going to turn up then, it would have turned up in that search.
And that used to be dirt back in here.
Right.
There were grueling ups and downs for the 20 detectives who worked this case for more than 2 decades. But for one detective, the time to solve it is now.
I go to bed thinking about that case, and I wake up thinking about that case.
Recently, 48 Hours learned there's a major development in the case. Tomorrow, Detective Allen and his colleagues will announce that they believe Paul Rolls, a known serial killer, is a lead suspect in the disappearance of Tiffany Sessions. Rolls' last known victim, Elizabeth Foster, was found here, just 1 mile from where Tiffany disappeared. Right now, police are excavating the site where Foster's body was found, hoping to find Tiffany.
25 years ago we started. I hope we're going to finish.
How long will you look for her?
No, I think till the day I die. How do you not look for your kid?
There's one other tantalizing clue. The serial killer left behind an address book, and on one page he scribbled 2989, which is the very date that Tiffany Sessions vanished. He also put a number 2, which detectives believe means Tiffany was his second victim.
And is there anything else that ties this Paul Rolls to Tiffany?
Well, he was a pizza delivery man in Gainesville, so he could have delivered a pizza to her door, and he worked a construction site on the route where she power walked every day.
And where is he? Paul,
He actually was sentenced to life in prison for another crime, and he died of natural causes. No deathbed confession, but they still believe that he's the one. He's their number 1 suspect because of this address book.
All right, Tracy Smith, thank you. Good to see you.
So we were out there for close to 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. We excavated 2 football fields, 4 feet down, went through every bucket of earth with equipment. We didn't find any human bones. We decided to go public with the information. Our sheriff had a big press conference on the 25th anniversary of Tiffany's disappearance, and we put some stuff out to the public. Everything we know about Paul Rolls, and it was quite a bit more information, but I only have half an hour. We put this timeline out, which was very helpful from an investigative standpoint, and it highlighted all the important dates in Paul Rolls' life. Also the writings, his writings from the address book, that was one of the writings. He documented all of his victims. The red Ford Bronco that he drove, that's what he was driving when Tiffany disappeared, when he murdered Beth Foster, and when he abducted Laura. And we were looking for that car. Also, Tiffany's Rolex watch. It's never been recovered. I believe it's still on her wrist, wherever she's at. And Hillary, we're not giving up. Mike Dwyer's the guy that did all the work on this thing. He's my tech. He did a great job. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Detective Allen, thank you so much. Hillary, thank you so much. I know this is one of those issues that definitely spawns lots of questions. Do you all have a couple minutes for 1 or 2 quick questions? Alrighty, and I think Karen's got the microphone ready. Let me ask one real quick of both of you, especially you, Detective. In the 25 years since, how have resources and procedures changed where families don't have to rely upon themselves to do so much of this, that there actually now are resources and operational procedures adopted by law enforcement to assist?
Actually, I think Hillary should answer
Okay,
that one.
Hillary?
She's really involved in the cartoons.
In the very beginning, we didn't have the internet. That's allowed us to get the photograph out of the missing child. And we had individual task forces in specific areas. But then in 2003, there was an imminent rescue that was a program that was started by Detective Fernandez down in Miami, and it evolved into the CART team. And we here in Florida, we have 7 CART teams, and every one of them has been certified. And I've spoken at the Tampa CART, the Orlando CART, and the one over in Brevard County, and also down in Miami. So I still have 3 more to go. But that brings community resources to a missing child issue. And the most important thing when you have a missing child is right away, you have to get as many people on that case as physically possible, and that CART team allows that to happen.
So tremendous changes in just 2.5 decades.
Right. In the beginning, when Tiffy was first missing, we had to do that all ourselves. And now we have law enforcement, we have the community, and we have things in place, protocols in place for every one of those participants in the CART. And they do an annual CART call-out practice for every one of them so that they are up to speed on what is currently going on.
Excellent.
And the biggest problem that we had was communication. And this came out with Paul A. Klaas's case out in California. All the different law enforcement agencies were working on a different frequency, so they didn't communicate with each other. So, and you also had jurisdictional boundaries that you don't have today because now we have mutual aid. If you're in one community and they have a resource that you can use, then most of the time the law enforcement supervisors or chiefs and sheriffs will say, yeah, you can borrow my so-and-so or you will do this. So everybody's working together now that they didn't do before.
Similar to the resources that that Detective Allen was talking about with the FBI, NCMEC, et cetera, are the resources at your disposal now.
Yeah, and you just don't really know till you're there, was the bottom line. So I usually just call the top biggest agencies, but having the FBI in the case, water resource, I need someone interviewed in Oklahoma tomorrow, it's done. I need like an address checked in Jacksonville, it's done in an hour. You have to use all the resources at your disposal.
Night-and-day difference. Thank you. Some other questions for our two presenters? Yes, ma'am, over here.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, is this Paul Rolls? Is he suspected of any other homicides in the area?
Yes.
Detective Allen?
Yeah, he's a serial killer. He worked for a construction company, put up scaffolding at the apartment complexes where Tiffany worked out, but they gave him a company truck. He drove all over the state of Florida, and his DNA's in the system.
I know. Any other questions for our two speakers this afternoon? In that case, Detective Allen, thank you so much for your persistence and your perseverance on this and other cold cases. We greatly appreciate that. And Hillary, to you, honestly, I don't know where you find your strength, but I'm glad God gives it to you because you are teaching and helping educate others in an area that is way too important to ignore. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us this afternoon. Well, folks, we've come to the conclusion of this year's Orange County Sheriff's Community Crime Summit. Before we wrap up, I want you to think about some of the presentations we've heard here today. Major Brown grounded us in the crime stats. We had a presentation on human trafficking and prostitution, on drugs, and now on missing person cases. I mention that because all these have one common thread. All of those elements take away perhaps the most important thing that's given to us by our Creator, and that is the ability, the freedom to choose our own destiny and fulfill our potential. All those subject areas we touched on today eradicate or erase that ability to reach our full potential. Fortunately, we have a lot of great men and women here in this county, in Orange County, that wear the green of the Sheriff's Office, that are constantly working to educate, to prevent, to investigate, and to arrest those who would separate us from our life, our liberty, and our property. To all the men and women that serve here in Orange County, not just Orange County Sheriffs, but across law enforcement, will you all please join me in thanking them for their leadership and their professionalism? And now for closing remarks, it is my pleasure to return control of our program over to our Sheriff, Jerry Demings. Thanks, Sheriff.
I'm going to ask Fred to come back up and we're going to make a presentation to him, but as he comes up, just kind of want to summarize really the goal of today's summit is to hopefully inspire you to be re-engaged within our community. If we're going to be serious about reducing crime, I know that if we use purely a law enforcement approach, if we're the only ones in the game, we're not going to have the kind of successes that we really need. So you heard from our speakers that when we engage the community and we intertwine ourselves in the fabric of the community, we're much stronger as a community. We're much stronger as an agency. You're much better off in your pursuit of having a successful outcome in your investigations. And so I want to say thank you to this entire audience for being here this afternoon to share in this occasion. And hopefully you learn some things as we move forward. Again, it's about community engagement, community collaboration, and helping to solve crime. So, Fred, come on up. We've given Fred all types of things. He's been our master of ceremonies for each one of our 6 summits since I've been sheriff, and I'm certainly indebted to him for the assistance that he has provided in each one of them. So this time, Fred, we have a specially engraved writing pen for Fred, and I hope you too get a chance to use it when you vote on Amendment 2.
Thanks, Sheriff. Thanks to your team, too. They did a great job.
And we couldn't get this summit and many of our other summits done without the special assistance from our community partners. And there's one that is very special who helped to underwrite the cost of bringing in Monty Stiles, who you heard this morning. And that person is Attorney Dan Newland. Dan, please come on down because, give Dan a round of applause because Dan gets it, you know, the former detective. You know, he gets it. He has been a loyal member of our agency. He also continues to volunteer as a law enforcement officer as one of our reserve deputies, and he works for free. Now that he's a famed attorney, he doesn't have to work for a law enforcement agency for money. He does it now out of the goodness of his heart and giving back to this community. So we have a very special plaque to present to him. It says, presented to Daniel J. Newland in recognition of your continued outstanding support of the Orange County Sheriff's Community Crime Summit, September 29, 2014.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you, Sheriff.
No. I would just like to say thank you. I've supported this event for the last, I think, 5 years now. And Monty, I know I didn't get a chance to hear the other speaker, but I want to just say what a tremendous and amazing inspirational speech for all of us to take something back from. And I'm certainly going to do that. And I just want to thank all of you. And as a community, I know that we're going to, no matter what happens with Amendment 2, we're going to make this community be a great place. Thank you.
Okay. Give it up for Hillary Sessions for coming here today and staying with it. What a fantastic job she's done. She's staying in the fight. We have a special presentation for you as well. Detective Allen, I believe I have some very good homicide detectives as well. I believe my homicide detectives are the best in the world, but you're a pretty good detective as well, so come on up. We're going to recognize you. And now as we come to the close of this summit today, there are some individuals who had the responsibility for being on point, for coordinating all of what you saw here today. and I have to recognize them, Captain Picanzo and Captain Torres. Please stand. Now, they're the face of the planning that went on, but they had a lot of backup, and so all of your staffs that assisted you, would you all who worked on making this summit a reality, would you please stand at this time? By virtue of the fact that you got applause this afternoon, you did a very good job. We enjoyed it. I know that I did. I took away something from this summit, as I do with all of them. And the last point of business that we have is, again, to thank all of you for being here. We look forward to doing this for many years into the future, and we're going to stay at it with your help. God bless you all.